Hello and welcome. My name is Tan, and in this video, I want to talk about how to talk about AI. And really, before I get started, maybe I actually want to talk about some things um, about how not to talk about AI. And in particular, this is just my opinion, but there's a couple phrases that I really dislike. Um, you know, so basically phrases around these things like "dumb it down, please." Um, and the reason why I don't like this is that I feel that communication it's a two-way street, and both sides have value to bring to the table. And so, if the first thing someone says is, "Oh, can you please dumb it down for me?" I feel that it doesn't really do the business person any justice because it makes them like they're not dumb, right? Um, or even like the term layman terms. I don't like that either because it just doesn't help the cause. It doesn't help the communication. Because if you really think about it, like what does it really mean to dumb it down, right? Like how do you make something dumber? Um, I just dislike it. So I mean, it is my opinion on it. So you don't you can use these terms if you really want. I'm just not a big fan of it. I feel like it's just bad for communication, and it makes it seem like as if like one party is lesser in some way than the other one, and I feel like that's just not good communication. The last one might be a little bit weird. Maybe some might catch some people off guard. I don't like it when people say, um, yeah, can you give me a non-technical explanation of what's going on. And the reason why I don't like that is I feel like that delivers the wrong message. Sometimes if you tell somebody to explain something in a non-technical way, they actually miss very important details. That and then because they try to be non-technical. So with that out of the way, let's talk about some ways that we can talk about AI. And I feel like the first thing I want to talk about is how to name or identify models. Um, if you are a machine learning engineer and you've been in the field, you'll notice that people have these really great acronyms for AI models, uh, and what those names are usually acronyms for are usually describe what it does or like sort of the methodology of it. Um, but I find that those types of names aren't actually very useful for people who are not AI practitioners. And so, what I would recommend, the way to sort of identify or to talk about the various AI models, is to use some combination of the input and the output of that model. So, skills the title. Um, Something like that, because then it makes it very clear what's the input and what's the output. Um, and in that scenario, in that sense, right, the technical details is in the middle. The technical details how it does it. And someone might argue that for a business person they might not need to know how it's done, but they should at least know what is the input and what is the output. Um, and the reason why I kind of want to talk about that because I feel like it really helps identify the unexpected inputs, right? Um, if you have a model that's like that's called skills the title as my example, and somebody puts in something that you wouldn't consider as a skill as the input, they might not get a good output, right? And then it becomes very obvious that like, oh, I just maybe I didn't input the expected input. Um, and again, it comes down to communication, right? Because what was expected, what was the expected input, and then just by being very clear up front and naming the models in this way, it just helps facilitate conversations further down. And then so if you think about another reason why is that it also helps identify new business cases, because one of the biggest problems with machine learning models is that it was trained on something else, on one thing, and then when it went into production, there was new business cases, so there was new things that went into it, um, and therefore it might not have produced the desired outputs. And so when everybody at the table is able to talk about the inputs and outputs, it then becomes very easy to identify what are these new business cases. And then lastly, I feel like what's then really helpful is that just understand the big picture, right? Understand that you could have lots of models. Some of these outputs are going to be the inputs to other models. And you can sort of see the entire system. And I feel that that is actually very technical in my opinion. But I also feel that people who might not be, who are not machine learning engineers can still understand that type of a diagram, and they can still understand, okay, what are the inputs and what are the outputs, and maybe they don't know what happens in that middle box, which is I think okay. But that's also why I don't like the word, like give me a non-technical explanation, because I feel like whenever people ask for that, they sort of skip this input and output step. And I feel like that's very critical, because if they don't know the inputs and outputs of these models, they're not going to be able to chain the entire system together and see what happens. So, that's my recommendation for you guys, for both sides. If you are on the business side and you're talking to an engineer, I recommend you ask them. It's like, hey, what's the input? What was the output? And facilitate that conversation starting from that. If you are a machine learning engineer, I recommend you do the same thing. Start by naming your models. Well, maybe amongst your team, you can name it however the way we traditionally name it. But when you talk to someone outside of engineering, perhaps try this method of naming it so that it's easier to identify and talk about models, especially since chances are you're going to have multiple models, so we don't want to confuse them. So that's my advice. Let me know if you guys have any questions. I'm definitely open to feedback, and thanks for watching.